I want to start this discussion by reading out a paragraph, uh, and you know I'll not yet declare where this paragraph is from, but you will know why I am reading this paragraph out. It reads like this. So you will like this paragraph. Too much sensitivity always makes for bad poetry. Too much sensitivity always makes for bad poetry. Too much sensitivity prevents wounds from healing also. And I must therefore thank all our political parties and prominent national figures in business, journalism, publishing, the arts, sport and Hindi cinema for contributing to the deadening, the cautery of those tendrils which demand fresh air and love and peace in excess. It's a poetical mistake to use abstractions. Let me say then that I thank everyone by whose means I have become so accustomed to living in this country, on this planet, that I should be much more a misfit than anything else. This paragraph was written in his foreword by Vijay when he wrote his book First Infinities in 2015. And Kaveri, this paragraph really introduces Harsh Mander to the audience. That here is someone who 20 years ago spoke to us into this. I am senior to all of you here because of one reason, which is that I have heard Harsh Mander when he was far younger than he looks today. This was exactly 20 years ago when I heard him for the first time asking us to wake up early to go for our physical training at 5 in the morning in Mussoorie. And since then, I've been longing to hear him each time he speaks anywhere, or each time he writes wherever he writes. I've been an avid follower and a permanent student to Sir, who taught me and a lot of us in the batch of 1993 what it means to be sensitive, what it means to be patriotic, and what it means to be a good human being. That's what he has been, and that is some teaching that I have never found in any of the many textbooks that I read and prescribed to my students. And that is from there that we begin this conversation. When we look back at COVID, we have by now dissected it in several ways. There have been so many papers written on this issue. In fact, I must tell you that when January 31st, the first COVID patient came to Kochi airport, that was the first time that somebody from Wuhan had landed in India. And by February 28, when there were about 50 patients of COVID in the country, there were 120 papers written on COVID. And that was the amount of work that we had already done, some of us academics, even before we saw the COVID in all its hues and colors. But by now, the academic world has done a lot of work on COVID. But all of us have missed out on the lesson that COVID taught us. So much so that by now most of us have even forgotten that there was a COVID-19 that happened not too long ago. So the first question is that what is the big lesson that COVID has left us with? What is that big lesson that we ought to remember COVID for?
Thank you. Can you hear me? As I am told, as I get more intense, I speak softer and softer. So if you have a problem, please just call out. Firstly, it's a privilege to be here in memory of Vijay, and thank you, Vikram, and all of you for gathering here. COVID-19, a friend and a very fine writer whom I'm sure most of us admire, Arundhati Roy, she said, COVID-19 is a virus But much more than that, it is an X-ray. It's an X-ray that reveals to us who we are and what we have become. One lesson, Amir, and Amir, so we are mutual admiration society, so you'll have to forgive us. Amir was my first, from the first batch of my students when I joined the faculty in Missouri in the National Academy of Administration, and a student I've loved deeply ever since. Amir, you asked me what was the one big lesson. It's hard, while you were asking, I was thinking, what was the one big lesson? Let me try to sort of start somewhere. Something close to 5 million people died.
Yeah.
And we've already as a nation forgotten. I start my book actually by saying why we must remember. And I start off by saying we must remember first to give ourselves time to grieve. Every one of those 5 million lives that went were human beings with lives, with dreams, with futures. And let us at least give them the dignity of our grief to start with. But then, after grieving, I write so that we can rage, and we must rage because the greater part of all of those lives that were avoidable deaths. They were lives that could have been saved had the state acted differently. And that's why I've called this book Burning Pyres, Mass Graves, and a State That Failed Its People. So, the failure of the state that reached almost, certainly criminal levels. But then I go on to say that I also write the book so that we can hope. And the hope that I find and I record in the book is, while the state failed us, ordinary people rose up in every part of the country and showed us what solidarity and what kindness is. And then I say, with all of these, equipped with our grief, equipped with our rage, equipped with our hope, can we look to the future? And I hope that in the course of this conversation we'll talk about each of these. Yeah. But I think the single biggest lesson that I think COVID taught us is how little we care. How little we care about the lives of people of greater disadvantage. From the moment that Prime Minister Modi announced the lockdown, most of us were sitting in front of a television screen. He said, firstly, stay at home and work from home. As he was speaking, I said, he's the Prime Minister of this country. Has he forgotten that 9 out of 10 workers in this country are informal workers who eat only what they earn every day? What about them? And then he said, keep social distance. Social distance anyway is a very problematic term in India because we've kept social distance for 2000 years. Let's call it physical distance.
Yeah.
So I said, has he forgotten that 60% of Indians live in one room or less? What kind of distance are they going to keep? He said, wash your hands regularly. Has he forgotten that water, people don't have running water, they have. And as the months passed, I think what was demonstrated most visibly is that some lives matter. He was speaking to people like you and I. So our lives need to be protected. And there's millions of lives that are entirely dispensable. And it is that, our sense of our lack of recognition of the equal worth of every human being, I think, came through most strongly. And our failures of solidarity. And I'll just talk about one thing that, you see, when the migrants started moving out, firstly, people, middle class people like you and I in many parts of the country said, but where did all these people come from? How come that millions of people, totally 30 million people were walking the streets, the largest distress migration that human history has witnessed? Where are all these people coming from? And I said, just think of any day in your life. I mean, who, before you get up, puts milk on your door, puts a newspaper on your door, who comes in and cleans your floors, looks after your children, cooks your food, drives you to work, and so on and so forth. So our inability to even see the people whose work and labor makes our life possible. Then, if any of us, suppose any of us are in a foreign place, far away from home, and suddenly your income comes to a halt. There's no money, there's no food, and the whole world seems to have collapsed before a virus which nobody understood and threatened to take so many lives. Where would you want to be? Obviously, you want to be with people who you love. How was it so difficult to understand? And when I saw 30 million people, India's railway network carries 23 million people every day.
Yeah.
All you needed to do, say 1 week, there were just 500 cases, just go home to wherever you want to be, because this lockdown is coming, and think of the distress that could have been happening. But the last thing, while all of this was happening, people were being flown, from all over the world, who were stranded, and one particular sort of group of, a few lakh students was in this strange place called Kota,
Yeah.
where children are sent from class 8 onwards for tuitions. And these were middle class children, and influential all over the country, and people said they have to come home, they have to come home. And so special buses were organized for them. I dream of an India where at least one student could have said, I refuse to get onto this bus because so many young people my age are walking in the hot summer month hundreds of kilometers, beaten by police batons, drenched by disinfectant. I refuse to get onto the bus until you provide this to all my brothers and sisters who are walking the streets. Is it too much to imagine a society where you and I feel this degree of solidarity with our fellow human beings? And so I've really rambled, and I'll just end here, Amir. My biggest lesson is, on the one hand, about how little our state cared, but equally about how little we, people of privilege in this country, care. And I think we get the government that we choose and deserve. And so it's really the absence of public compassion is my biggest lesson from those years.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I will, I'll just read this out for you, because, and this is why you should read this book, because it says it so clearly. where, Harsh Mander asked this question: will there be a rage against these leaders who displayed no remorse, accepted no blame, and made very little provision for the future? We must remember that the suffering unleashed in the humanitarian crisis of the pandemic was not caused by the virus. It was instead the inexorable consequence of public policy choices which treated the lives of millions of the working poor politically and morally as dispensable. We must remember that these lives could have been saved. Disaster struck because we allowed our government to fail us, and because we, people of relative privilege, did not care enough. We must remember, so that we don't allow such a disaster to overwhelm us with death, sickness, mass hunger and mass displacement ever again. It is our highest public duty that we must not forget, and that is why I write this book. I think that's the message. That's the reason this book has been written. That's the reason we are discussing this 3 years on. I have a mischievous question to ask. Don't answer this. Answer this in your own minds. How many of you know who India's health minister is? Can someone raise a hand? Yeah, two, which is par for the course. I asked this when we were discussing this on television one day, and everybody was so defending the government so heartily. And I said, okay, let's stop this debate, and I want all of you to tell me who the health minister is. And not bad. That's the answer that I expect. Some Malviya. Yeah. Imagine, and I asked this on national television. There were 5 experts, health experts, who were sitting there. One of whom was the ruling party spokesman, and she did not know. Because while in the entire world the health minister was coming every day and giving us the true picture of what was going on, in India we were being told to ring bells and light diyas and shout asking corona to go by the Prime Minister. So really, when the farm sector reforms happened, the same debate, and I asked the same question: who is India's agriculture minister? Anybody? Oh wow, there is one person who knows. But really that is the level of our acknowledgement of the government, our understanding of what our government does. And therefore this phrase, which Sujata Rao used brilliantly, she would have been here if she was in Hyderabad, which used very brilliantly to title her books. Her book is titled Do We Care? And that tells you everything about India's broken health system, which this book brings out in great detail. But I want to move ahead to something else that has been Harsh Mander's, among the various contributions, has been a very significant contribution. I don't know how many of you know as to how much he has fought on the hunger issue. It is because of him that I understand that we are the hungriest nation in the world. That every day 150 million Indians go hungry. And do we really care when we butter our next toast that 150 million people haven't eaten today, they haven't eaten yesterday, and a lot of them haven't eaten for 2 days. And that hunger was really exacerbated with this shutdown, with this lockdown, this draconian lockdown that the likes of which you didn't see anywhere in the world. So sir, I want you to dwell on this issue, because your chapter 2 on hunger is really a very disturbing chapter. It not only talks about death, but it talks about hunger, and I don't know which one to choose as the worse evil. Given all that you've done, and I know that you've worked on hunger with the Supreme Court itself for so long, but where are we on this issue, and how has COVID made it worse?
No, India's unfinished battle against hunger. Every year, the Global Hunger Index is published, and India, as the size of our economy grows, as our wealth, collective wealth, actually the wealth of a very few people, but whatever, grows, India is actually falling lower and lower. This year we were rated at 111 out of 125 countries.
Yeah.
That was the latest. Nepal, which has emerged from a civil war and is much poorer than us, was at 61. Bangladesh was at 80 something. Even Pakistan,
Better off, yeah.
shamefacedly one needs to say, was about 101 or 2, I think.
Yeah.
But what does this represent? See, the global hunger and our government, every time we are the only government in the world which keeps saying we don't agree with these figures, although it relies almost entirely on official official data. This, if I speak about hunger and let me start, I fear that, see, none of us in this gathering, I can more or less be sure, knows what it means, what involuntary hunger means.
Yeah.
We might fast, we might do other things. And involuntary hunger, as somebody who's taking care of your children, I've said this often, but it was, I think, one of those moments in my life, it's probably till I die, it'll be sort of some of the things that was written into my soul. It was a group of Musahar Dalit women who said to me, what is the most painful lesson that we have to teach our children? And I said, what is it? And they said, it is a lesson of how to sleep hungry. To tell your child that, I have struggled, I'll do everything, but there will be nights, many nights, when I can give you no food. And I can only teach you how to sleep hungry. And I was thinking about my own child, and if I had to teach her this most terrible of lessons. What makes this even more horrific is that we have no shortage of grain. We have something like 67, and at that time we had, when they were speaking, we had something like 50-60 million tons of grain, which doesn't mean anything to most of us except nerdy economists like Amir. But my friend Jean Therese explained to me that it means that if you put the bags of grain that we have in our store in a line, you can go from the earth to the moon, come back and circle the earth 2 or 3 times, and yet 150 million people sleep hungry at night and have to teach this lesson to their children. I do believe that this is, when human history is going to be written, this is going to be regarded as one of the most cruel periods in human history. Not that there was much greater suffering and hunger in the past, but that we have the resources so many times over for this not to happen. But in all those years when I worked as the Supreme Court Commissioner on the right to food, hunger was largely confined, raw hunger was largely confined to the countryside, not the cities. People come into the cities because however poor you are, even a street child, within a week or 10 days, you are willing to do, very hard work and very exploitative terms with no protections, you will have money to eat. You can pick rags to start with, you can sell your body, you can do many things. And so what COVID did, what the lockdown did, was an explosion of hunger in cities, of a kind that I don't think, I wasn't alive during the Great Bengal famine, but we haven't seen that kind of hunger. And when the Prime Minister was speaking, I resolved, I've learned some things from Gandhiji, and one is of the idea of civil disobedience. And I said, I refuse to accept this lockdown. And I will be on the streets, and I was on the streets from the next day. And I thought I'd be one lonely figure but trying to organize food for some people, but many young colleagues supported, and we grew larger and larger. And then because of Karwan-e-Mohabbat, which was responding to hate crimes across the country, we had a collective of good people, and they joined, and from the jungles of Jharkhand to the river islands of the Brahmaputra, we were then organizing food. We did some 10 million meals. But while doing that, the pictures I saw, in fact, the first half of this book is really written almost in red heat. I used to see, you barely gather at a place and start distributing food. 5,000 people, 10,000 people would gather. When finally, because we're going to the Supreme Court, there was very reluctantly the government in some places like Delhi started distributing food. There were sometimes 3 kilometers, 4 kilometers. I mean, you would wake up in the morning and sit in the hot sun and wait for your turn, and after 2-3 hours you'll get a little ladle of food, and then you barely go back, and then you have to sit in line again. It's that kind of hunger. And hunger, please understand, is not just a physiological sort of crisis. It's also deeply, deeply humiliating and dehumanizing. To have to, for people to have had to, we started moving around different parts of Delhi, for instance, where parts of Delhi, which I also didn't know, where, these small, what are called micro, small and medium enterprises, 5-10 people working in, all of them suddenly became, and all of them had to, line up, for food with a kind of desperation. So the shame of many memories, I'll just talk about, just one, for instance. There was a sort of informal pavement slum, and I remember we were walking trying to distribute food, and a woman was sitting outside her apartment, and she was trying to cook something on two bricks, and then she quickly covered it with her anchal. And I sat down with her and I said, what is it? She said, I feel so ashamed. And I said, why are you feeling ashamed? She said, the legs, the feet of chickens apparently is something that no one eats. And she said, I've been driven to, this is all that I could get, and I'm able to give this to my children. So I put my arms around her. I said, why are you feeling ashamed? You should feel proud. When the state and most of us have abandoned you, it is you who are taking care of your children. And so please hold your head high, don't feel, we should be feeling the shame. So it was this, these images, and I remember this other person, we were distributing food, and this guy was getting more and more sort of angry. And so the rage, at least he said, Modi ji, and everything is Modi ji, and it's also his fault. I mean, everything is centralized, so the conversations are always sort of proxy with Modi. So they said, Modi ji is saying we have to protect ourselves from the virus, but before any virus kills us, we'll die of hunger. And then another person said, what does he expect us to eat sitting at home when we have no work? Does he expect us to break the pieces of our wall and eat it every day? Stuff like this. And I recorded some of this for the same reason that we should not forget.
I get reminded of this really old couplet which said, पत्थर उबालती रही बूढ़ी माँ तमाम रात, पत्थर उबालती रही बूढ़ी माँ तमाम रात, बच्चे फरेब खा के चटाई पे सो गए. See the pun on the word खा के. So it's really, the hunger issue was heartbreaking, and we saw it just about everywhere. I want to take this to the next horrifying turn that COVID took. All of us who are studying the epidemiology of COVID would never have guessed the crazy turn it took when suddenly the virus became Muslim.
Yeah.
And some 960 Tablighi Jamaat workers were arrested, quite a lot of them foreigners, thrown into jail for spreading virus. And there were people who were beaten up in the countryside because they were Muslim, and therefore they must be spreading the virus. So I mean, it still is baffling that that something like this could happen and then become the national narrative. People in Karnataka beating their neighbors up, people getting into mosques and beating people who are praying because the virus is a Muslim virus. Mukhtar Naqvi, who was the minority affairs minister at that time, saying that the Tablighi Jamaat is the Talibani Jamaat and that that they are out to terrorize Indians. That to me, despite all the hatred and intolerance and whatever we've seen, this level was baffling.
Yes. Pardon?
You don't need this? Oh, you don't need this?
I don't need it. You're absolutely right, Amir. I'm just amazed. I'm amazed at the power of, we talk about fake news, misinformation, but there's a lockdown across the country. Within a week of the lockdown, the narrative has spread to every corner of the country that basically the government is not to blame. All of this is caused by the Muslims. One gathering which was done with permission, before the COVID thing had hit us, people had gathered, the Tablighi Jamaat, and we can have many views about them. They believe in going back to the fundamentals of their religion. They gather and pray and so on. So they had gathered. Now they use this to say as if this gathering of 900 people in one corner of Delhi was the cause of the spread of COVID across the country, and people absorbed this. I mean, I have a lot of my young colleagues who started distributing food said they were insulted and turned away when they said they were Muslims. Giving food to somebody who was hungry. This whole idea जिसको आप आजकल वो थूक जहाद कहते हैं, it also started at that place. This idea that they said that we can't allow, even when it started opening up, Muslim vendors are deliberately putting saliva, infected saliva on the vegetables so that we buy them and we become sick. I mean, these are really sick narratives, but how did they spread across the country it's and our willingness of the majority community in every corner of the country, educated, less educated, who absorbed this and accepted this narrative. Again, we can forget because it didn't affect us. Just imagine they were in the same situation as you and I, struggling against the same fears and hunger and everything, and suddenly you have to carry this extraordinary allegation that somehow you have a conspiracy to kill everybody else with the virus. I mean, this idea. Let me tell you a little story, and why while I have stories of hope, what happened to us in the middle class. Defense Colony is a sort of upmarket place in Delhi. A family there had a lot of tragedy right in the beginning. The grandfather, father, grandmother, all of them were infected. They were struggling. The grandfather died tragically. Now, in all of this, the family thought it fit to file a complaint against their security guard, who was Muslim. And they said the security guard was Muslim and he must have secretly gone to the Tablighi Jamaat meeting and he brought the infection to us. The police accepted the complaint, they arrested him and they made a lot of propaganda about it. The starting point was, what business did they have to call in the security guard, during the lockdown? But we in the middle class can't manage without some domestic help, so they got him in. Sometime later, the security guard was tested, and he kept crying that I never went to the Tablighi Jamaat. Even if he had, it was not, and he wasn't. He was clean. So he was finally released, but there was not much. Nobody apologized to him, nobody did anything. It turned out that their grandson was studying in the US, and clearly he had brought the virus with him. And it was they who were endangering that poor security guard. They weren't the security guard who was endangering them. This story, it's sort of, you're saying lesson,
yes,
how little we care. And the story actually didn't end there. And there was a sort of not a footnote to the story, a chapter 2 to the story. The same family, after 2 or 3 weeks, still needed a domestic helper. So they got somebody from Jharkhand, a young girl of about 18, 19. And then they sent her samples for testing. 3 days later, it used to take that long. 10 o'clock at night, the report came that she was infected. She was COVID positive. The family immediately at 10 o'clock at night turned her out onto the streets. It was pitch dark. She was terrified. She was a young girl from a village, wailing away. And they turned her out onto the streets. And I think, I'm telling this story because it looks like somebody else's story, but we all have participated in some degree of stigmatization of the poor and the lack of care. And one of my reasons for both writing the book but also these book discussions is, let us look at ourselves. The X-ray that Arundhati Roy talked about. In this X-ray, we look at our government, look at ourselves. And are you happy with what we see?
Thank you so much. This, the stigma was really something that most of us in the health domain were very scared of. We had seen during HIV/AIDS, people get lynched because they were coming out of a HIV clinic, and we feared that, and that's exactly what happened. And what was worse was that doctors who were returning home from treating patients of COVID were not allowed by their apartment owners to come in. Doctors, they slept in their cars outside because you are carrying infection, and then next day you go to the same doctor. It was surreal, this whole experience. But it's the right time for me to bring you to something that's a very formidable chapter in this book, in terms of what was it that we lacked. Where did India's public health system fail us? And I think that is the most insightful chapter in this book, where you look at what has happened with India's health system as it has become more and more privatized, as it has become more and more urbanized, and moved away from data, from testing, from surveillance. This chapter, for all of you, is really a great analysis and a chronicle of how poor data can harm the treatment or the tackling of a pandemic like this. We have several instances where health ministers issued orders saying that don't classify patients as COVID. Treat them for COVID, but don't put them down as COVID. And therefore, when the deaths happened, we had deaths happening for all other reasons except the reason for which it happened. So on this really serious issue of the health sector, of the right to health, of why 70% of the country still does not have access to any form of modern medicine, and therefore any other pandemic is waiting to kill the same 5 million that it did this time. What is the reason? Why are we not worried about our health system? We are very worried about education, but why not about health?
The single line answer to almost every one of your questions is because we care so little. You and I now have private health insurance, and when we fall sick, we're not worried because we can sort of go in and get world-class treatment, in hospitals that more and more resemble five-star hotels with a darban on the door and all of this. And we don't care about what is happening to the rest of us. And you know, we had built up some kind of public health system. I recall, my father was an IAS officer. In my childhood, I don't ever recall going to a private hospital.
Yeah.
We used to sit outside and wait outside the government clinics only. But we exited, and with it, you know, they say program services for the poor are always very poor programs. That's what we've done to schools, the same thing we've done to public health systems. I could go on a lot, but you know, one or two facts. A large number of our doctors train often on taxpayers' money and then exit and leave for North America and Europe. I have a very dear friend, Dr. Shah Alam, who teaches at All India Institute. One day he was telling me, you know, when I teach my first year class, only their bodies are in the class. Their souls have already migrated to the US. So okay, now I'm saying after all that migration happens, out of the doctors who continue to live in India, 8 out of 10 doctors work for private corporate hospitals and private sector. Only 2 work work in the public systems. We spend just a little over 1% of our GDP on healthcare, and ordinary people out of pocket spend 2%. Any good system, they say now 5-10% of GDP should go into healthcare. We're spending 1%, and so on. So, you know, at this point, I mean, one question could be asked: what could we have done? Now, clearly, if you have just 2% or 2 out of 10 doctors in the public systems, there wasn't a great deal that we could have done, except, this is, what would I have done if I was confronted with this problem without changing the history? You could only do it by nationalizing for the period of the emergency. We had to nationalize the healthcare system. Every doctor, every nurse in this country will work for government for this period. Every hospital bed across the country will be a public bed, is where we needed to start. And so when the Prime Minister would keep announcing we've created so many more beds, it was a complete lie. What were they doing? They just had those many doctors, those many beds. So they would stop. I mean, one especially dramatic case was cancer in Bombay, and they took the cancer patients and they were sleeping under an underbridge. And those beds were then diverted to COVID. I mean, we could not, unless we, in the short run, nationalized our public health system, there was no way we could have coped with what happened. But and you know, what lessons, so I was tempted to bring this in, and so this might be a good point. I mean, I thought at least after this catastrophic, super catastrophic sort of experience, I thought at least we'll have learned, let's have a proper public health system.
Yeah.
And I waited for the next budget, and I thought there'd be huge increases. See, please, this 1% also, how are we spending it? This 1%, a significant part of it is going to super tertiary hospitals like All India Institute, not on primary health services. And much of it is now going as premium to private, again to the private sector in health insurance.
Yes.
We have to have a public health system strong, and we have examples from all over the world. I thought at least now there should have been a national uprising to demand a public health system. We had none of it. The government has made barely any increase in its public health allocations. So it comes back to the same thing. Why are we not learning from it? Because the lives of millions of people don't matter. And the lives of those who do matter have found our exit paths.
Yes.
Which is why, I mean, I was really constant outrage every time a chief minister or health minister or somebody else was got COVID. They all checked into private hospitals.
Yeah.
Now, the health minister of Delhi, sort of, God, if you bless him, he's in prison for many years, months now. But he, when people asked him, you're the health minister of Delhi, why have you gone and checked yourself into Medanta? He said, no, actually my wife put a lot of pressure. She said, you wouldn't have survived if you went to a government hospital. And I said, aren't you ashamed of yourself? I mean, aren't you ashamed of yourself to do this? And we're not learning, we've not learned anything from this. I mean, I made a silly, I made a resolve to myself that if I'm on the streets, I will get COVID. If I have to go to a hospital, at least with COVID, I'm not going to go to a private hospital. I will go into a public hospital, and I will not go into a private room. I will go into a general ward. And that almost killed me. But that's another story, and it's not an important story in this. But what I saw happening in the public wards, it was as close to hell that you can be. That's what we've left our ordinary people to do.
I actually wanted to underline what Sir said just now. The next budget, when the finance minister was reading out her, when she came on at 11 o'clock, started the budget speech, the first sentence she said, which was so heartwarming, I almost jumped out of my chair saying, wow. She said that this is going to be a health budget because we have just gotten out of the worst pandemic we've ever seen. For people like us, it was. And then she read out the numbers. I just went quiet. I read the numbers thrice before I could speak. We were on one television panel because the estimate for last year was 74,000 crores. The budgeted estimate for last year. The revised estimate was 78,000 crores. And what has she given for health in this budget? 70,000 crores. I read it thrice. And then when I asked, she said, tell me where I should take money out from. And should it be from education? So, it was bizarre that after the worst tragedy that we saw, the budgets actually came down. So the one little thing that happened in our neighborhood was actually something that you have prescribed. Our neighboring state, Andhra Pradesh, the chief minister, the first thing he did was he nationalized the public health system. He was the first one. God knows what happened with that, because again, we didn't know. But Andhra did not have the numbers that even Telangana had. They had very few numbers. Maybe one of the reasons was this. But he did that, and he was the only one. So we have, these examples. Kerala, less said about it, the better we know what a stellar role that the minister and the health system played. So one of the first people who were unleashed on COVID in India, and I am just reminding you of this. We have forgotten this. Do you remember who the first frontline people were who were sent out to handle COVID patients? To give you a clue, they were not doctors, they were not nurses, they were not health professionals, not ashas. They were our poor policemen. Because we said it's a curfew. We used the word curfew. One of our chief ministers, and sad to say my own chief minister, said, shoot to kill. Imagine, so I had this SP student of mine who called up. She said, sir, what do I do? 12 of my constables died yesterday. They don't know what COVID is. They find somebody on the road, they pick them up and take them away, and next day they are in hospital. It was really, something that I still haven't come to terms with. The other policeman who calls up saying, I am posted in Zahirabad, there is this ambulance with this woman from Gulbarga, she is going to die if I make her wait for half an hour. But my chief secretary has said, no, nobody from outside Telangana will come in. And it was right, because Telangana beds were full. So should we allow Kannadigas to come? I mean, imagine the dilemma that poor girl was facing. It was, and that is why I want to bring back something that you just brushed aside. Because I think that among the chapters, from this very, very insightful chapter on public health and the need for data and surveillance, is this very personal chapter, which talks about Harsh Mander's own tryst with the disease. It is a nerve-wracking chapter. It's a chapter that will really stir you emotionally, to say the least. And it describes what happens to him when he gets COVID. I want you to say a little bit about it. I mean, the chapter in itself, every word has to be read to understand what this gentleman who came back from death wrote in this chapter. It's a telling chapter, it's an important chapter, but I want you to, despite yourself, tell us a little bit about what you went through.
I hesitated to even write this chapter because it's not about me. And even at my worst, millions of India's poorest people suffered a lot more. But I finally included it because it was a moment of bearing witness. And so I went in stubbornly into this public ward. And once you were in, and my daughter had COVID, so they allowed her, so she came, she put me into the van and then said bye-bye, and then it was over. Nobody could have any contact with you after that. I go into this ward and it was chaotic. It was, the noise levels, decibel levels was really high like this. All the monitors were screaming, but they were not connected. Nobody. I said, where should I lie down? They said, find a place. And no doctor ever came to see us. Then and all of the ward boys etc. were looking like spacemen. Though, but I had to, and I like to talk to people, so I started talking to them as the hours passed. And at home, at least somebody was checking my oxygen. Here, nobody was checking anything. And then the boy, I discovered they were untrained. They said that none of the trained staff of the hospital is willing to come. So I was working as a room boy in some hotel, and my family is starving. So I said, I'll risk COVID, but I have to, so I'm here. And then you feel even more secure. I'm in this place, no one's trained, no one's this thing. People were, wailing because at least 10% of people thought they were about to die, and they were wailing away. No one was talking to them. Their families were not close by. They couldn't talk. So there was wailing sounds. There was screaming sounds. It was really hellish. And a lot more happened, and I almost died, but I let that pass.
It is, if it was not real, it would be really humorous. And so I must tell you this other really macabre incident that happened, and it's hilarious, but it is horrifying. There is one big hospital in Hyderabad. So a bunch of youngsters go and deposit their uncle who's COVID infected. Same black hole, you don't know what's happening. 14 days later, there is a call from the hospital saying, sorry, your uncle is no more. Come and collect his body. Go there, and they get this rolled up ball that's tightly taped, saying, go, dispose him off, don't touch, don't open. And so immediately what they do in the parking lot is cut it open and check it out and find it is not uncle. So they go back and say, this is somebody else. Say, oh, sorry, take this one. Now they go back again and do the same thing. Check, this time they are very angry. They barge into the ICU Like, this is not our uncle. An uncle is sitting there. sorry for this, but we've had this conversation going on for some time, and as I said that for those of you who have forgotten, or those of you who remember very little, do read this book, right? At least the chapters that I focused on, and
yeah, just a story, taking off from where Amir just spoke. The second part in the book gets even more horrifying as you move along into the second wave, with people choking for lack of oxygen and so on. There's a little incident. A photographer is taking pictures because their bodies, on sidewalks being cremated. There's total mayhem all across, and 24/7 the crematoriums are working. So he's taking pictures, and somebody comes to him from the back and says, "Can you take a picture of that smoke?"
Oh, yeah.
And he says, "Why?"
Yeah.
He said, "That's my mother. I was not allowed to touch her body. I know she's somewhere there. Somebody has cremated her. This is my only memory of her." And the photographer actually has written this. He said, I've never heard a sadder thing in my life. So this is what we did.
Yeah. Yes, I remember that story that you wrote. So now I just like to bring all of you in. Please feel free to first ask questions, and then any comment that you might have. I know that almost everybody here has had, if not a direct, but a second-hand conversation with COVID, or with anything else. As audience, I'm asking the first question.
Okay.
That's my right. It is that, when I read this today, and you will see that parallel, especially that chapter on migrants and what we did to them. That chapter could have been titled Hamas and Gaza. Who are the migrants? Who are the settlers? How do we treat them? At what time do they give up? Why do they go home? We were standing on these highways in Hyderabad and asking people with two little kids walking down, said, "Where are you going to?" He very casually said, "Allahabad." Allahabad. And, I would shudder to take a train to Allahabad. And there were thousands of these. So, sir, the question is that, do we see the same thing with what is happening today in Palestine?
Actually, I've just returned actually from 2 weeks of teaching in some universities in Germany and then in the United States and speaking. I've come back with a soul even more weighed down because it happened to coincide with the Israel-Palestine war, and I was amazed to find, and I was among people in different gatherings who were supposed to be the finest, among the finest intellectuals of the global north, but I found them completely unwilling to even grieve about what was happening to Palestinian lives. And it happened over and over and over again. And in the end, it's the same, and whenever I got a chance, I would try to speak to them gently but firmly, saying, have we come just so far as humanity that you will decide whether you want to grieve that a child has been killed after checking if the child is Jewish or Muslim, Israeli or Palestinian? Is this all the progress that we've made as humanity? And it's an apt comparison, Amir, that you made, because it reflects the same thing. In fact, while they were speaking, I was also thinking, I might be in Manipur.
Yeah.
Because I've written a very long piece that finally came out a couple of days ago. It was sort of considered too dangerous to publish. But what I realized was that when you speak to the mighty people, they'll talk about how much they have suffered. Their villages are burnt down, they have suffered, they have losses. And they completely obliterate any account of what the mighty people have done to the cookie people. I mean, they far more villages have been burnt down among the cookies, but you're not even acknowledging it. When you talk to the cookie people, again, they'll talk only about what they have suffered and not what people of their identity have also inflicted on the other community. And while I was there, I tried hard, and when I do is I said, can we just stop for a while and just do an exercise? Only think about the pain that the other community has suffered.
Yeah.
Can we do that? And they kept, and I had to keep stopping them. No. Think, you're a mighty, think of what has happened to a cookie whose village has been burnt down. But we don't, I mean, I realize why the soul is so heavy is, this book and the last year that I've seen, Manipur, Uttarakhand, Haryana, the same, we built walls in our humanity, and now Israel, Palestine. How long will it take for us to say every life is of value to me? And I will grieve about what has happened to that life, which we did not demonstrate at all as middle class people during COVID. And we have not demonstrated it when violence is happening against targeted minorities, Dalits for centuries, Muslims in more recent times, Christians in some places. Until our grief is not sort of initiated by the identity that I own and the identity that the other owns. I mean, just as a completely, I often, Muslim people, because of the stands I've taken, often set me aside and say, we are so grateful for what you have done for our people. And I tell them, anyway, I haven't done anything very much, but we are talking about your people. Matlab India's Muslims are not my people. And if you're saying that, then all my work has no meaning.
Yeah.
And if they're my people, as much as your people, I'm only working for my people. So how do you define my people? Is something that I think, it's my own country, I grieve for all of us. But what I saw these last 2-3 weeks in North America and Europe told me we all have that. What is the journey that we'll have to travel to recognize the equal worth and value of every human being? How difficult is that? And why are we so unable to do this?
Yeah. So, audience, please. Can I have some show of hands that I know? Yes. Can I give you this?
And since you've been in the government, your father also has been a bureaucrat. I just want to know how the government works. I mean, can one person take such a drastic step, such a dumb decision of something as big as a lockdown? I mean, there are several other things that we can talk about, several stupid things that were done. But this is one of the dumbest things. I mean, even people with a little bit of administrative knowledge, people who have some, thinking about logistics, what would they have advised him, or did he just not take any advice?
So I wanted to ask, what do you think, what do you attribute towards the intense mistrust that people have towards the realities of COVID. So I worked in like rural India during the second wave, and people within my family wouldn't believe the conditions that I myself have seen.
And that is, are we better off today if COVID was to strike us again? Very good. And second question, we've been talking about this. We've all discussed in our groups and so on as to what should be done, why is government doing this. I would like to make one little suggestion for your consideration, that a group of people should make the budget for the next year and give how much you want to give to health, education, hunger, all these problems, and list out a group of items which will not be done. You will not make a new parliament. You will not make a half an hour faster train.
All right, thanks. We'll take.
Hi sir, my name is Shyam. My main question is does hyper-nationalism is affecting our country as of now? That is one small question. And one more question is what is it, during this COVID time, I was working on nutrition development in Karnool district. So at the time, this national software called CAS, which is all children, Anganwadi children will be there, right? Entire database has been stopped at that particular time. So we couldn't get any, how many children are in malnutrition and all, we couldn't get database for nearly 6 months. So many children during that particular time, nearly 770 children in my constituency, they were in malnutrition. I don't know, across world it might have been very, it was also lockdown type of thing.
Yeah.
The entire data was collapsed.
If I could have a pen and paper so that I don't forget questions, but let me try. They're all very thoughtful questions. I've been a civil servant, and I can say with complete affirmation that you have both the right and the duty as a civil servant to dissent. In fact, my first lecture in Missouri to every new batch was the right and the duty of a civil servant to dissent. And you are here to defend firstly the Constitution and secondly the interests of the poorest person. And only then are you a servant of the government and so on. So I think, it's quite clear that Mr. Modi is an extreme example where he clearly did not consult his cabinet, he didn't consult chief ministers, he didn't consult the health bureaucracy. There was a committee which advised strongly against it, and he went ahead with it. But people should have risen up, the bureaucracy should have protested and so on. I'll just tell a little story here. Sorry, thank you.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a little story here, which I've got in the book, which I'm sure is going to annoy the nationalist, hyper-nationalist. Yes, okay. A country that did actually considerably better than us was Pakistan. And why? Imran Khan, the playboy and all of this, when it was suggested that he goes ahead with a lockdown like India had done, his response was, how can we have a lockdown in a country like Pakistan where most people are daily wage workers and so on? And he refused to do a lockdown. As it turned out, they virtually did very little of anything. But the end result was actually much better than ours in terms of both the economy, impact on the economy and on healthcare. So, the absence of public compassion, I think, is what characterized us a lot. Your questions were again very thoughtful. A people's budget, of course, we should do it. I'd just like to underline that India has one of the lowest tax to GDP ratios in the world, and much of our taxes are indirect taxes. We are taxing the rich far, far too little. So resources are available if you are willing to raise them. They say a 1.5% tax on the wealth of dollar billionaires is more than enough to finance a very wonderful healthcare system, education system, etc. We are not willing to do it. And just a little factoid to make matters perhaps a little light. Again, credit to my friend Andres. Mr. Adani, his wealth increased 10 times during the lockdown.
Yeah.
I just find that just so incredible when almost everyone became poorer, 10 times more. But to understand how much that wealth was, Yodres said that if 100 workers work at statutory wages, how long would they take to get the wealth that Mr. Adani had? Before, of course, it collapsed again. How many years would 100 people working at statutory wages take to get his wealth? 1 million years. It's many janams. A million years. You have to recognize how much wealth has now, India's dollar billionaires increased, I think, by 39%, substantially in the health sector. We had Mr. Poonawala saying, pandemic is a time to make super profits.
Yeah.
He actually made this term, and he did. So, we have to do it. But if I just could divert a little bit, and that's also because I'm forgetting the questions. Apart from healthcare, the one other big lesson is workers.
Yeah.
Is workers' rights.
Yeah.
And let's not forget that. There was one thing that they should have done. If you were even going in for this, it's the greatest lockdown in human history, the scale. Even China at its peak locked down 5% of its population. We locked down 100%. So, if we were going in for it, the one thing at least we should have done was give minimum wages to every worker. Yeah. If formal workers are getting their salary sitting at home, minimum wages should be paid. And I'd written a series, I went to the Supreme Court, also wrote a series of op-eds with Prabhat Patnaik and Jayati Ghosh. They calculated it would have cost just 3% of GDP. Yeah. And actually the damage to, and then nobody would have had to do distress migration. The hunger impact would not have been there, the impact on the economy would have not been there. I always feel that policies that are motivated by what I call public compassion, what Gandhi said, Gandhi had said, when you're in doubt, think of the poorest and the weakest person you know and have ever seen, and think of what will do to their life. And I often think, wo talisman hota. Could we have done all the things that we did in the lockdown if we were thinking of that last person? So our people's budget by all means, but it has to be with that last person in mind. And the very important question that I think one of you asked was, are we ready better?
Yeah, for the next one.
WHO has said, don't talk about if the next pandemic comes. It talks about when the next pandemic comes. That's the only question. And I think we are not an iota better off than we were. And because we've not addressed any of these questions. A little story again, with Prabhat Patnaik, we were discussing that suppose I was the Prime Minister and I accepted this idea of giving wages to every worker. In rural India, it was still feasible because of NREJ. We have a list of workers, they are registered and their bank accounts. In urban areas, there are none. So actually, we discussed, and at some point, it became almost like a joke, like a bad joke. I said, suppose we had to distribute, there's no account of the workers, there's no registration, he said literally we'd have had to do what we do in elections, say this month adults come, we'll put one black mark and we'll give you minimum wages. And next month you come and we'll put another black mark and give you minimum wages. Because we don't have any, and I'm saying labor laws, some labor protection, what government after government, and this is both BJP and non-BJP governments, did after the pandemic was to reduce even the few protections that labor had. Yeah. So to me, the two biggest lessons has to be a public health system that serves every person without profit, and the second is labor rights. If you don't have them, we are totally unprepared for the next pandemic.
So on this,
the young man had talked about hyper-nationalism. It's actually very good to read, somebody like Tagore on why he thought nationalism was such a dangerous idea. I much prefer patriotism. I love my country, and I do. I mean, that's why even though I risk being arrested tomorrow, I'm still insisting on coming here and working here because I love my country. But as somebody said, I love my country doesn't mean my country is perfect.
Yeah.
You know, I criticize my country because I love it so much. But this hyper nationalism has created a kind of, there's like a formula in algebra or something, where the supreme leader is equal to the government. No, the nation is equal to the supreme leader is equal to
the government. Yeah, the government.
To the majority religion, to the government, and so on and so forth. So if you criticize any of these, particularly the supreme leader, you're acting against your religion and you're acting against the nation.
Yes.
You're anti-national. And yes, I'm anti-national if that's your definition of anti-national. I'm anti-national because I love my country a lot. Like unbearably.
Brief on vaccine episode on which India has done the research. They have helped the other countries. How far you see it is contributed in a brief, please.
We have distributed about, I don't know how many vaccines, but to over 120 crore people in a period of 1.5 years. Was it necessary? Did these vaccines work? I mean, is there any data on that? That's question number one. And the second thing is, if you have distributed so many immunizations in a period of 1.5 years, is it an indication that at some level our public health system is working, or that could have been achieved in some other way?
On the vaccine question, I don't want to get. I mean, I don't think I'm technically qualified to get into the debate about vaccines. The worries about vaccines, whether we did enough. I have only recognized that the only protection that we have against, or had and continue to have, against the continuance of this pandemic was that enough of us have enough antibodies to be able to withstand. Although it's mutating, but every time it mutates, if you have antibodies, there's clear evidence that it's less and less severe. So India actually is the largest producer of vaccines. We have a very long chapter on this, and I've explained it at length. The first 6 months, we needed actually at least 80% of the population to be seropositive for the second wave not to have happened. We'd hardly started vaccination in those first 6 months. So a lot of the second wave was completely preventable if we had gone in. For those who oppose vaccination or think a delayed vaccination is okay, I just wanted to say that the only alternative is actually something that is Malthusian, which is just let people get infected and die and so on, and at some point we'll reach a point where enough of us have antibodies, and therefore I feel that vaccination, with all the dangers that it carried, was the only way ahead, and India delayed much too long. And why we selected 2 and not others, why we did not select, in fact, we selected one, which was biotech, which was not even, properly, and even today it doesn't have recognition. Why we did not, the public sector units that were producing vaccines, why we did not ask them, why we actually did not go in for compulsory licensing well in advance and actually have everybody producing vaccines, which would have allowed us to enter very early into the vaccination story and supply to places like Africa, etc., which were. So I think it's again a spectacular example of where we went wrong. I have chapters here on hospital beds, of course. I spoke briefly on oxygen, on vaccinations. One by one, there was a great deal that we could have done which we didn't do, and it cost lives. The budget, I mean, yes, the lower house is somewhat more representative, but the way Parliament has been functioning in these last 10 years in particular, there's hardly any debate. Anything of importance is not being discussed. So we need to reclaim the whole democratic process and what is pre-legislative public consultation, pre-budget public consultation. Who gets a voice into the budget? It's largely big corporations today. Where are we seeing consultations with landless laborers, with poor farmers, with casual workers, with homemakers, about what are their aspirations, etc. So we need to deepen our democracy in multiple ways. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We've exhausted our time. Do you want? Okay, we'll have two more questions.
You think, I know what your answer is going to be, but should we think of a memorial for millions who died? I mean, the government says, I don't know what it's like, 100,000, 200,000, whatever. We know that millions died. You think 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the line, I mean, this number is more than the people who died in partition, probably more the wars, probably more the crowds, etc. And yet we have forgotten. I remember there was one professor in Michigan or somebody who come with this number 3-4 million, and she was savaged on the internet.
Now 5 million seems a very
but the point is that she said that I can take all those savage attacks, but what touches me is a letter from one of the survivors who said, "Thank you for remembering my parents." We just forgotten all it. We all of us here have forgotten.
Is that one more? Okay. All right. So
Hello. It's a small question. So everybody is aware about the pandemic, what has happened. So just wanted to check, was it a reality or a fake epidemic created by man to depopulation?
Right? That's the last. No. There's one. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Come back. Okay. Good. Just a second. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Dr. Surendra Ugali. I'm not from the public health system, I'm from the private. And since this is Manthan, I thought, if you don't mind, it's not just a question, but just some points and thoughts that I made that I'd like to express. So, I haven't written the chapters, but I have a few notes. So what you basically showed was that the moral values of society have gone down tremendously. And that would explain a lot of the actions that have happened. And keep on happening. So lots of bad things, wrong things happen. We are dissecting all the situations. But what was the root cause of all this? The root cause for all the neglect in human actions and behavior was fear that spread all over the world. The vested interests, in my opinion, succeeded in spreading fear. Whether you call it the Chinese virus, you could call it Fauci virus, and they managed to, with the help of pharma and the vaccine firms, they instilled enough fear which I would say was responsible for a lot of the actions which didn't seem right. Whether it's government, society, all of us. Like for example, when you mentioned the issue of the migrants, my question would be, for example, we at our hospital, we didn't lay off anybody, we didn't send anybody home. What happened to all the people who employed these migrants? Why didn't the factory owners, the home owners, etc., look after all their employees? I mean, all their workers. And there was the issue about why the lockdown was done. The question raised. Let me ask you this: if any of us had somebody infected in the house, did you isolate that person or not? Was that not a mini lockdown? And the government's actions are not, it's not a virus that happened in India. It's not the action of the government here. Everyone ran helter-skelter. It's like a bomb blast and nobody knows what to do. So our nation also followed so many of the actions of many other nations in the world.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So no state in the world, honestly, no nation in the world could effectively deal with what happened. And every nation, it's just that maybe we were photographed a lot more than other nations. When there was, if you remember, the mayor in Milan, Italy, because of the connection with the fashion industry with China, the mayor announced that hug a Chinese. Italians, they began to hug the Chinese. And the next thing we know, the Italian healthcare system was completely overwhelmed. Spain was overwhelmed. We talked of nationalized healthcare. I mean, one question on the side also comes, you know, society looks at doctors must work for low, free. What about lawyers? What about businessmen? What about whoever else? I mean, then make it an equal society for everyone, and that would be fine. Don't just expect, doctors only to do that.
Thank you so much. Thank
Okay. I'm sorry, I had a lot of words, but I had to say what.
Great.
I think they,
All right. So thanks so much. We'll have the last set of answers, and that's it. Yeah, please. Can I have that back?
friends, this was a friends, please.
Yeah.
Friends, please. Friends, that was a rich set of. Please, when you've asked questions, just stay back please. There were a lot of things I don't know. I'll try to answer very briefly. It wasn't a fake epidemic, I'm quite sure.
Yeah.
Fear, yes, fear, swept the world. And I think that was a huge problem because we've seen that what fear does, whether it was leprosy, whether it was TB, whether it is HIV, fear, when it joins up with the epidemic, instead of people coming forward, they're getting more and more stigmatized, people didn't want to come forward, etc. It is true. Lockdown, my friend here said every country went through lockdowns. It's not true. Some countries like South Korea, etc., chose not to go through lockdowns. Many countries did not.
Yeah.
Sweden did not, and their responses. But we are not talking about no lockdown. We're talking about limited lockdowns, which are very, very carefully modulated. And what was the worst thing about India's lockdown was it was a lockdown with almost no relief. That was the problem. If we felt together after much consultation that we have to have a nationwide lockdown, we should have thought then how are people going to eat and live, and let us give them wages, let us give them this relief. The problem with India's lockdown was it was a punishing total lockdown of a scale unmatched in any country in the world, with one of the lowest relief packages in the world. You're shaking your head, but that's factually true. So that was the problem, that we did not have a relief package. We had a very, very minimal relief package. I went to the Supreme Court demanding a relief package, and I saw what were the conversations and how reluctantly the state gave very little, which is very different from what happened in other parts of the world. To just give you one example, I work with homeless people. So I was very anxious about what's happening to homeless people. I checked with friends in London, and they told me, and this is under Boris Johnson, who's not some great statesman, but they said, what is happening? They said they're all in hotels. 7-star hotel downwards, every hotel in London was booked to house homeless people, through which, and the government paid all the costs of it. The hotel industry survived, the workers survived their jobs, homeless people were taken care of. There are solutions that are there from around the world. It was how we did a very cruel lockdown that was the problem. You spoke about employees and what we, employers and employees. A friend, Ravi Srivastava, who's one of our best labor economists, said that many things broke down when the migrants walked. But one thing that he said, most importantly, what broke down was trust by the workers. Because the workers know that they are oppressed and they're exploited, etc. But they had believed that when a catastrophe comes, we will be protected by our employer and by the government. And what we demonstrated, both demonstrated that we don't care two hoots about what happens to you. So that trust broke down. And the saddest thing is when the migrants went home, many of them to me said, whatever happens, we'll never come back. But within 2 or 3 months, there was no food, there was no work, and they had to come back. But this time they came back even without that mirage of trust. They knew they're coming back to, if this happens again, neither the government is going to protect me, nor is my employer going to protect me. The idea of the memorial, Ram, is absolutely important. I mean, this book is in a sense also, contributing to this. My book hasn't sold very much, but my publisher keeps sort of reassuring me. He says 30 years later, this is the book people are going to read because they'll want to know what happened. Yeah. So I said, okay, I'll wait 30 years, but I wish they'd read it now. But it is important to remember for multiple reasons, most of all, so that at least, both the space for grieving, at least that person was remembered. It's precisely this, that every life is grievable. But beyond that, as I said, also for rage, also for us to call to question. I mean, elections are happening. Elections happened in UP where bodies were floating. 100 years earlier, there was a poet called Nirala, who, as a contemporary, he lost most of his family, and he described the motive of the Spanish flu epidemic was bodies floating in the Ganga. And 100 years later, again, we have bodies floating in the Ganga. What are we learning? So we must remember so that we learn. And lastly, I did want to say about, the collapse of moral values. Sending you home with the idea that we have collapsed as a society would not at all be true. Because I saw wonderful examples from all over the country in all of this. And I've described them in detail. I just sort of say, you had people, I think in Hyderabad as well, and many others, where nobody was willing to touch the bodies. They ensured that if they were Muslim, they were given Muslim rights. If they were Hindus, they were given Hindu rights and sent off with beads. There were people who, of course, food was huge. Oxygen. I write about a boy, I think Vinod something. He lost his father because he choked for oxygen, and he was just in class 12. Next morning, he sat down and he created a sort of app and so on for people who need oxygen, and he saved a few hundred lives, sobbing all the way because he was remembering his father and he was saving lives. We haven't yet collapsed as a society. We had the Gurdwaras doing, the oxygen langars. We had the most extraordinary signs of kindness and solidarity. And so, I love my country. I despair often about how cruel we've become and how uncaring we've become. But I can still hope because I see these circles of extraordinary kindness in the darkest of times.
Thank you.